Cryptography and Network Security series. In this video, we'll be speaking about the remote user authentication principles and we'll look into the remote user authentication using symmetric encryption. If you're new to my channel, do check out the CNS playlist. I've tried uploading all the important topics, all the important algorithms. So check out that and subscribe to my channel. Let's get started. We'll understand what are the principles behind remote user authentication. Firstly, understanding what is user authentication. So user authentication is a fundamental process for verifying the identity of a system entity. It could be a person or a device. So you are authenticating if this device or a system is valid or safe one or not. So you are claiming which is claiming to be a specific identity. That is, if this entity is claiming to be Alice, so we are checking if this entity is Alice or not by either looking at the public key or private key or making use of the session key. So this is about the user authentication. It forms the cornerstone of access control, user accountability, and secure communication. By identifying the user, by authenticating the user, we can further perform various operations upon it. Right. Authentication process involves two main steps. First one is identification. Identification means user presents a identifier to secure system. This step keys foundation for security services like access control. Here you can be presenting identifier like username or ID. Coming to verification, here your user provides or generates authentication information to confirm their identity. That is, they are making use of passwords, for example, to confirm that you are this particular entity here. Next, we have means of user authentication and challenges. So looking at the means of user authentication, there are four general methods which may be combined for enhanced security. First one is something the user knows, user or individual knows. User or individual could know the password, PIN, security Q&As, security questions. Here the challenge is password may be stolen, forgotten or guessed. Right. There are chances where the password could be forgotten by the user or it could be guessed by the third person or the attacker. Next, we have something that the user or possesses or individual possess. It could be the smart cards, cryptographic keys, or cryptographic tokens and all. So these tokens could be stolen, lost, or forged. Again, that is a threat. Then next we have something individual is, that is biometric, static biometric. So fingerprints, facial recognition, retina scan, and all of that. So here challenges issues with false positives or false negatives, cost or user acceptance could happen here. Privacy concerns are a big threat when it comes to static biometrics. Then something that individual does, that is dynamic biometrics. It could be the typing rhythm, handwritings, voice patterns, or handwriting analysis and all of that. Here variability in performance and environmental impacts. Accuracy issues are there here. That is one of the major challenge. So I've written down all the four challenges here. Okay. Next, we have mutual authentication. Mutual authentication means both the parties in communication will verify each other's identities. Suppose here I have A and here I have B. So B sent a message stating that it is B and A sent a message stating that it is A. Now A will check if this person is B or not and B will check if this person is A or not. So you are mutually authenticating both the parties whether whatever the identity they tell whether they are the same identity or not. This process typically involves the exchange of session keys and addresses two key concerns. There are two key concerns here. First one is confidentiality. That is, all sensitive information, including the session keys, must be exchanged here. Firstly, then we have timeliness. That is, to prevent the relay attacks by using mechanisms like timestamps or nonces. Next, we have relay attacks. So, relay attacks involves resending captured message to deceive a system. For example, simple relay. That is, attacker captures and replays a message at later time. So he has got a message, he keeps on sending it again and again. That is repeating it or replacing the intercepted message again and again. Then we have replay within valid time window. So here the timestamped message is resent within its valid period, potentially causing operational disruption. That is, suppose ATM is the best example here. Within 2 minutes, if you are not entering the card, so within that time duration, you'll be getting the message. You'll be getting like to enter the pin and all. So if you don't enter the pin, then after a particular time, the valid window, if this valid time window closes, then you have to start the session again. Next, we have replay with suppression of the original. So your attacker will suppress the original message, leaving replay undetected. That is, it is even the user or the receiver may not know that the message is suppressed here. Then we have backward replay without modification. So here you are sending the original message back to the sender. Message is sent back to the original sender, potentially causing confusion if the sender cannot distinguish between sent and received message or not. So again, all these are the tricks which are used by the attacker to confuse the user or the receiver. Those are called as the replay attacks. How do you overcome these attacks? So there are certain mechanisms to counter these replay attacks. First one is timestamps. So message is accepted only if its timestamp is close to the recipient's clock or not. So it will check with the receiver's time clock and with the sender's time clock. If they are close enough, then only such messages would be entertained. Challenges here are clocks need secure synchronization. That is the first challenge. A window of time must be defined to accommodate the network delays. This is always required, and synchronization faults can be exploited by the attackers if there are any chances of it. The mechanism we have is challenge response. So here a nonce is called as a random number. Random number is sent as a challenge. Firstly, challenge is sent, and the response must contain the correct nonce. If this is obeyed, then we can say that challenge or response is working properly. Next we have is a sequence number. Sequence number will ensure that messages are processed in proper order, in proper sequence. But then challenge here is high overload to track the sequence numbers for multiple users. So these are the mechanisms which could be used to counter the replay attacks. Next we have is one-way authentication. One-way authentication is, it applies to scenarios where sender and receiver do not communicate simultaneously. For example, email. In email, either one person is sending or one person is replying back. There is a two-way communication is not happening here. So first thing here is encryption in email. So protect the message so that only the intended recipient can decrypt it. That is our first step. So we have to ensure that mail handling system cannot access the plain text content. It is very important to make sure that the mail handling system should not get to know what is the plain text which is there in the encrypted message. So proper encryption of mails is very important. Next we have a sender authentication. So the receiver will verify that the message originated from the claimed sender, ensuring the trustworthiness. So that's what these two steps are very important while we are dealing with the one-way authentication. Next we look into the remote user authentication using the symmetric encryption. So here it involves using a shared secret key between two parties to verify the identity of a user trying to access a remote system. So this method is often used in compliance with the trust key distribution center. So mutual authentication using key distribution happens in a distributed environment where there is two-level hierarchy of symmetric encryption keys. So which will include of firstly the master keys, and then there are session keys. So mutual authentication, both parties verify each other's identities. First point, a two-level hierarchy is used here. Master keys are shared between each user and central key distribution center. They are used for secure communication within the key distribution center. Speaking of session keys, they are generated by the key distribution center. They are short-term, or they are valid only for that particular communication, and they are like distributed securely using the master keys. So this mechanism will ensure that there is confidentiality on authentication for communication. The Needham-Schroeder protocol for key distribution. So this protocol sequence will tell us a secure key distribution by making use of the key distribution center. So here we are looking at the authentication and secrecy. Okay, so we are making sure that the between the two entities, suppose A and B, using a key distribution center, that the transfer of the session keys is happening properly or not. So let's take two users here, A being Alice and B being Bob, and in between we have a key distribution center. Okay, so here we have the steps which we'll discuss how the communication happens. Okay, firstly, Alice will send a request to key distribution center to communicate securely with Bob. Okay, so in that message she'll have identifier of Alice ID A, identifier of Bob ID B, and nonce N1. Nonce is generated by Alice. Nonce could be a random number. This is used to ensure that freshness is maintained and to protect against the replay attacks. Next, so this step will tell us that the process by informing the KDC that Alice wants to establish a secure communication session with the Bob. Now, key distribution center will respond. So KDC will generate a session key KS for secure communication between Alice and Bob. So this message is encrypted with Alice secret key, that is KA, ensuring that only Alice can be able to decrypt this particular message. Inside that message, we will have KS, IDB, and N1. So KS is the session key, IDB is Bob's identifier, and N1 is the Alice nonce. Along with that, we have encryption of KB, KS, and IDA. So this is a token which is generated for Bob to decrypt it. Okay, so that's why we are encrypting this using Bob's secret key KB, which contains the session key and identifier of A, telling that Alice wants to communicate or talk to you. So the second step will ensure that only Alice can read the message using KA, and along with that only Bob can encrypt this using KB. So after this we have A to B. Communication is happening between A and B. Right. So here we have KB, that is this is encrypted with Bob's secret key. Firstly, this it will include the session key and Alice identifier. This will ensure that only Bob can verify the source, that is Alice, and obtain the session key secretly or securely. After that, Bob will respond back. So Bob generates a new nonce N2 and encrypts it with using the session key KS, and he'll send the encrypted message back to Alice. So this will allow Alice to prove that she possesses the secret key KS. Alice has the secret key KS, as only someone with the correct session key can decrypt this particular message or the nonce. After that, Alice will send a reply back. So Alice will decrypt it, and in order to get the N2. So Alice will apply a predefined function f of N2 and encrypt the result with session key, and she'll send this back to Bob. She will. This is done in order to prove Bob that Alice has the correct session key KS, completing the mutual authentication which is happening here. So in order to summarize, first step, Alice is requesting a session key from KDC. KDC will generate a session key and provide a token. After that, Alice sends Bob the token. Bob generates a nonce and sends it back to Alice and encrypted. And then Alice responds with the transformed version of nonce. So here we are speaking about the secure key exchange, mutual authentication, and protection against the replay or impersonation attacks. Here vulnerabilities are replay attacks can happen for the older session keys, or Bob may accept, B may accept unknowingly the replayed message. These two are the vulnerabilities which are there here. In order to overcome this, Dennis proposes to overcome this weakness by providing a modification to the previous protocol that includes addition of timestamp to step 2 and 3. So her proposal assumes that master key is secure and has following steps. We'll look into the steps one by one. Firstly, Alice will send a message to the key distribution center, which will comprise of the identifier of A and B. So this step will inform the key distribution center that Alice wants to communicate to Bob, and she'll tell to initiate the key distribution process. After that, key distribution center will respond. So it will generate a session key KS, which is encrypted by using Alice public key KA. So this is encrypted using Alice secret key KA, which will contain the session key for communication. Firstly, IDB, that is Bob's identifier, and we make use of a timestamp here. This timestamp will indicate when the session key was issued. Followed by that, in order to send to Bob the token. So this is encrypted with KB, Bob's secret key, and then it will have this session key, and then Alice identifier and the timestamp here. So here we are making use of timestamp to prevent the replay attacks by limiting the validity of these session keys. So here we are encrypting each part that only Alice can encrypt it, and here only Bob can decrypt it, thereby providing the confidentiality here. Now Alice will send the message to Bob. She'll forward the same message to Bob. So this step will enable Bob to retrieve the session key securely KS. Only Bob can decrypt this portion using KB, right, his secret key. After that, Bob will generate a response. So Bob generates a random nonce N1 and encrypts it using the secret key N session key KS, and he'll send this encrypted to Alice. So here nonce N1 will serve as a challenge to verify that Alice will possess the correct session key KS. So this will ensure that freshness of the communication and prevents any replay attacks if they are happening. Next, Alice will send a response. It will be encrypted using the session key KS, and it will have function of N1. Here we are making use of the predefined function, which could be increment, hash, or any transformation to the N1. So we are encrypting the result using KS session key and sending it back to Bob. So here we are doing this to prove the Bob that Alice has the correct session key KS. Thereby we are completing the mutual authentication. So here function F will ensure that the response cannot be pre-computed or reused by any other attacker. So this process will ensure that there is secret or secure key distribution happening using a trusted key distribution center. Mutual authentication is happening, and then protection against the replay attacks or unauthorized access is happening. So that's what we can speak about the Denning protocol. So here I have written down all the points. Further, enhanced protocol was developed that addressed the vulnerabilities in both the NIDAM and Denning protocols. So here we have the protocol. Firstly, A will send a message to B. Directly A is sending a message to B here. So in this message we'll have identifier, A's identifier, Alice identifier, and NA. NA is a randomly generated nonce which is generated by Alice only. So this step will inform Bob that Alice wants to establish a session with you firstly, and then we are making use of NA here to ensure that freshness and we are preventing any replay attacks happening. Then B will send a message to key distribution center. Bob will forward the request to key distribution center, which will comprise of Bob's identifier, and then we have new nonce which is generated by Bob, NB. After that, here we have the encrypted message, which could be decrypted using the Bob secret key only, KB, which will have the identifier of A, Alice nonce, and then a timestamp indicating when the request was sent. So the encrypted portion will ensure that confidentiality and authenticity are maintained, proving the request came from Bob firstly, KB, and it was not tampered anywhere in the middle. Next, KDC will forward the message to Alice. So KDC will generate a session key for Alice, KS, sorry, and Bob, it will generate secret session key for Alice and Bob to use and respond with two parts. There are two parts here. First part is with KA. So this is encrypted with Alice secret key KA, which will have the Bob's identifier, the Alice nonce. This is for the verification purpose. Then the session key which is generated and Bob's time stamp. Here, coming to the other part, which is encrypted using Bob's secret key KB, which will have again Alice identifier, session key, and the timestamp and Bob's nonce. So here KDC securely distributes the session key to Alice and Bob firstly. Yes, and each part is encrypted using the respective party's secret key. Here it was for KA and here it was for KB. Confidentiality is met here. And then we are returning NA and NB here to prove that KDC received the initial messages and it is ensuring that it is fresh. After that, A will generate a response to B. So in this response, we have the encrypted session key, which comprises of this entire part. This is sent to Bob. So Alice also encrypts the Bob's nonce NB with the session key KS, and it is also sent to Bob. So the encrypted session key will ensure that Bob can securely receive the session key. Only Bob can receive it. So encrypting NB with the session key proves to Bob that Alice possesses the correct session key, completing the mutual authentication process. So here confidentiality, authentication, integrity, key establishment, all these factors are met here. So I have written down the explanation for the entire thing. Next we have is one-way authentication. So this is useful when sender and receiver are not online at the same time. For example, email communication. So this process will ensure that receiver can verify sender's identity and decrypt the message securely. Anytime it can decrypt and ensure the authenticity. First, Alice is sending a message to KDC. Alice sends a request to KDC, which includes identity of A, identity of B, and a nonce, a randomly generated number, which is used here. So Alice initiates the process to establish a secure communication with Bob. Firstly, we are making use of N1, freshness, preventing replay attacks. Alice will inform the KDC of her intention to communicate with Bob by mentioning IDB here. Next, KDC will send a response. It will generate a session key KS for secure communication between Alice and Bob. So it will send Alice an encrypted response KA here. So KA is the Alice secret key, which will comprise of the session key KS and Bob's identifier IDB, and then we have N1, that is Alice nonce for verification purpose, and then whatever the token which has to be sent to Bob from Alice is also sent here, which comprises of the session key and identity of Alice identifier. So here KDC generates KDC secretly distributes the session key to Alice. Both Alice and Bob it is distributing. It is encrypting with KA to ensure only Alice can decrypt it, and along with that it is also sending this part. Right, this part will ensure that only Bob can receive the session key later. Next, A will send the message to B. A will send the same message to B. Along with that, she is also sending the M and a message M is encrypted using session key KS. So here Alice is forwarding the KDC's encrypted component, this component, to Bob so that he can decrypt it using his secret key KB and retrieve the session key KS. So encrypting the message M with the session key KS will ensure confidentiality, allowing only Bob can decrypt it after obtaining the session key. So firstly, Bob has to obtain the session key, and after that only he can decrypt the message here. So here again, confidentiality, authentication, integration, and key distribution features are met here. Authentication, confidentiality, non-simultaneous communication. That is, you have just sent the message. Here, two-level encryption is happening, right? In the third step, if you can see, two-level encryption is happening. Firstly, we are getting the session key, and after getting the session key, whenever you can get the session key anytime. Only after getting the session key, you will be able to decrypt the message here and read whatever the content is present inside the message. So this was about the one-way authentication. I hope you have understood all the concepts in this video. If you have any doubts, let me know in the comments. In next video, we'll be discussing about Kerberos. The entire topic would be covered. Make sure you don't miss out these videos. Subscribe to my channel. Thank you.